Greetings everyone, and welcome to this month's Jyotish Journey webinar associated with the article entitled Cain and Abel, the Astrology of Siblings, where I give some what K. Rao, my guru, referred to as thumb rules or snapshot methods that could indicate, not always, but in a large percentage of the cases, indicates that a person is either the eldest born or the youngest born or the eldest and youngest among their siblings, right? So who would want to share with us what they remember about those snapshot methods? What could indicate this? What combinations in a chart?
The third and 11th. Third Lord and 11th, or the 11th Lord and third.
Third Lord and 11th, 11th Lord and third. What else?
Rahu in the third house.
Rahu in the third or Rahu in the 11th, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when unaspected, but you could also give this were that not the case. And then one that's kind of peculiar, of which the astrological logic behind it is not clear, but is a sort of a special.
Rahu behind the moon.
Rahu behind the moon. Okay. So again, don't expect this to, quote, work 100% of the cases, but you'll find that in a very large percent of the cases that it does. So, but then also I was giving predictive parameters both in the Parashari system and in the Jaimini system for timing the birth of younger siblings. And from the Parashari point of view, what are periods and subperiods that can give this from the Parashari point of view? Most obvious ones first.
Dasha, Sabdasha, Sabsapdasha, Lord being the third Lord, or somehow connected with the third house.
Right. So periods and subperiods connected to the third house of the third Lord, right? These are the most obvious ones. And then, but what could also give this event as well? Some other parameters from the Parashari point of view.
The
What about
Karaka.
Mars, Mark? Good morning.
Good morning.
Mars.
Sorry?
Mars the Karaka for younger siblings?
Sure. So, Mars being the Karaka of younger siblings, this running this period or subperiods alone can give this. Usually there's something more to it than that, but that's true. Anything else? What else?
The third from the third, the Lord and the house.
So there's principles of Bhavat Bhavam, the third from the third, right? What else?
Two planets connected in D3.
So period and subperiod of two planets strongly connected in D3, especially if there's any eligibility in the birth chart, right? Let me add to that K.N. Rao's statement that you saw me quote there, that planets strongly connected to the Lagna of D3. In the Lagna, aspecting the Lagna, can give this event, which you will also find to be very true. Keep going. What else? We're doing well here.
Periods and subperiods of planets, third from the Dasha Lagna.
Right, so when you have an Antar Dasha Lord that's falling third from the Dasha Lord, you'll see that this can bring siblings as well. One more that we've not mentioned.
Mars?
Yes, Luciana, that's absolutely right. So Karaka Mars, Prashahor is very clear. It talks about, a certain house that indicates certain things, but then, it goes into a whole series of statements about what you'd call Karaka Lagna. That is, when you're seeing indications regards mother, it's not just the fourth house, fourth lord from the birth Lagna, but fourth house, fourth lord from the moon for father, ninth house, ninth lord from the sun, from Jupiter, fifth house, fifth lord from Jupiter for children, for marriage, seventh house, seventh lord from Venus, and of course, they're for siblings, third house, third lord from Mars. Okay, now that's on the Parashari side. I think we've covered most of what I indicated there. And then from the Jaimini point of view, what could indicate this? What are some predictive parameters?
Periods and subperiods where BK is third from it or expecting.
Right, so we've got the BK, planet with the third highest degrees, that carries all the significations of the third house, third lord in the Jaimini system, and therefore when you're running a sign containing or aspecting, getting aspected by the BK, these periods become eligible, or from where the third house has the BK, or the BK is aspecting third from there, right? Anything else come to mind?
Similarly with Mars.
Yeah.
Right, so Karaka Mars falling third or a sign containing Karaka Mars now also becomes eligible for this. And so the result is, is that a lot of periods become eligible for giving siblings, right? Because, of course, they won't always. You have to think about what time of life a person is in. You know, they're going to typically get their siblings, you know, within the first 10 years of their life. Not always. I had a sister born 14 years after I was born, but more typically, it would happen within a certain time frame, right? But then also, most of you know what K and Rao taught, and therefore what I teach about how to identify periods that would truly give this event. And this is by using multiple dashas. Here we're going to be using two, one Parashara dasha, of course, Vimshotri, and then one Jaimini dasha, which would be Chara. But actually, I think many of you know, when I actually go to time a specific event, I like to use four dashas, two planetary dashas, Vimshotri and Yogini, and then two Jaimini dashas, Chara and Padanavamsha dasha, right? And what I like to see then is them lining up in terms of all showing an eligibility for bringing a certain event. And then what do we also then have to look at? What is the clincher, according to K and Rao?
Transits.
And we're looking at transits, right? And so I shared with you what he had shared with me about what transits you're looking for to be having been activated in the chart of the older sibling when it's about to have a younger sibling. What do you want to see? What do you want to? What's getting activated? Can someone share what they remember about that?
Double transit.
Double transit of Jupiter and Saturn. Aspect, activating the third house or the third lord. But always remember that the way he looked at this also is that a planet in retrograde motion, Saturn and Jupiter, would aspect as if from the sign before as well. Okay, and then that would give the broader time frame, and then he would want to see that within 9 months to even a year prior to the birth of the sibling. But then narrowing it down, what would you also want to see in transits?
Mars.
Mars within 90 days, having covered the same points, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then go on, what else?
Sun
within 45 days. And then, of course, the fastest moving hand on the clock, the moon, within 72 hours. But also these faster moving planets, if they're in the Lagna or aspecting the Lagna, right? This is also part of the transit parameters. So any questions about any of that before we then start looking at charts or anything that you saw in the article? Of course, you must have been thinking, if you have younger siblings or older siblings, you must have been thinking about your own charts that way. And if time permits at the end, and if people are willing, I'm going to ask some volunteers from the audience who maybe have some of these things like the Lord of the Third and the 11th, or 11th and the Third, or Rahu in the 11th or Third, to see if we can sort of blind test these sorts of things. But unless there are any questions, I'm going to pull up a document here where it's going to start looking at some charts. So someone please indicate when they are seeing a chart of a person by name of Pattie Boyd. Tell me when you're seeing. Okay. Well, does anybody recognize the name Pattie Boyd? You probably have to be from my generation, meaning you're really, really old, to recognize this name. Does anybody recognize the name? No? She was one of the most successful models, British from Britain, in the 1960s. Her and Jean Shrimpton, they sort of epitomized a certain look that was in vogue at that time. But what she really got known and famous for is that she married not one, but two of the most prominent rock musicians of our era. She married George Harrison, and then later was involved in a love triangle with Eric Clapton, who she eventually then married as well. So this is what she has her, might say, claim to fame for. And what in her chart could potentially indicate marriage to a famous person?
Mercury and Sun conjunct.
Well, why would that potentially indicate marriage to a famous person?
The sun being a karaka of famous and big.
Well, a lot of people have the seventh lord conjunct the sun. They're not married to a famous person. Any other ideas that way?
Fifth lord being in the seventh house.
Why would that necessarily mean you were married to a famous person?
Is it the 9-10 connecting with the seventh lord?
That's it. Sort of for Sagittarius Lagna, Prashara Hora tells us that the best Raja Yoga is a combination of the ninth lord Sun, which only rules the ninth house, and then Mercury, which rules two angles, but one of those angles being the strongest angle, the 10th. So this, major Raja Yoga here, there's more to it than that, of course, because a lot of people with Sagittarius Lagna have a combination of this way. But of course, this then also gets aspected by an exalted Jupiter as well. And so what might she became well known and actually was one of the top models of the 1960s in her Venus major period. In what way could this potentially have been predictable? A model is constantly walking a runway. What house would rule that?
Third house, and there is a Parivartana with a third lord, Venus there.
Very good. So obviously this Venus major period, which of course is a planet associated with the beauty industry in general, is in the third house, but as Luciana noted, it's very strongly connected to also the third lord by an exchange. But by what principle of Jyotish, just based on the Rashi, the fact that she was, very successful at this, again, one of the top models of that time, by what principle of Jyotish could that have been predicted in her Venus major period? Just based on the Rashi.
Venus is also the Yoga Karaka from the Dasha Lagna.
You have it, Vijay. It's Dasha Lagna here. Venus becomes Yoga Karaka planet, and now the exchange becomes 1-4. This is something I was highlighting in my article, Kaleidoscope of Time, on the importance of Dasha Lagna, particularly how from a particular Dasha Lagna, an exchange becomes, extremely favorable. From the Jaimini point of view, this was happening in her Leo Mahadasha. In what way was that predictable? It was happening in her major period of Leo Mahadasha. What do you see about that? How does Leo in Charadasha give?
A Gemini Raja Yoga in the 10th from Leo.
Yes. First of all, it duplicates dynamically that sutra from Pada, the second Pada of the first chapter, talking about Saturn in the 10th from Karakamsha Lagna, but now sort of dynamically. But what was then mentioned here by the person who commented, you've got a very significant Jaimini Raja Yoga happening from the 10th house from there with the AK. Now remember that AK has strength by virtue of the exchange, and it's very connected to Venus. That was the industry in which she, the beauty industry is where she was succeeding. But highly significant here is the mutual Rashi Drishti between AK and AMK, with both planets in strength, right? Both planets in strength. I hear someone, you might want to mute your mic if you're coughing or anything's going on in your background. But it was in this, she married George Harrison and married both George Harrison and Eric Clapton in her Venus major period, which, Venus as the natural significator of this could give this event, regardless of its house placement or lordship or any of that. Does anyone want to take a guess as to what sub-period within the Venus major period she met and married George Harrison, the Beatle?
Aquarius.
Well, we're talking Parashari at the moment. Okay, we're talking Parashari at the moment. So Venus major period, it would have been a planetary sub-period. Someone said Mercury.
Mercury, yeah.
And of course, that's a logical guess because it's the seventh lord. Didn't happen to happen then, okay? But logical guess.
Mars.
Mars in the seventh also would have been a logical guess, but no.
Sun. Rahu. Sun.
Who said Rahu?
I did.
Okay, Luciana, you get the virtual chocolate here. Remember this idea, folks, about Venus Rahu and Rahu Venus periods? Venus Rahu and Rahu Venus periods. So she met, oftentimes a very fated love affair, oftentimes leading to marriage. And this is what happened with her and George Harrison and her. It was very interesting, again, Venus in the third house. The Beatles made a movie called A Hard Day's Night, and she had a cameo part, very small cameo part. I think she just had one line in the movie, she was appearing in a movie, and this is how her and George Harrison initially met. So on a movie set, Venus in the third house. And parenthetically, interestingly enough, when she was 70 years old, she married again in Rahu Venus. She first married in Venus Rahu, and then very much later in life, she married in Rahu Venus. But the reason we're talking about this chart is why. Why do you think I'm showing you this chart, given our topic today?
The exchange between Saturn and Venus. Saturn is the third house of siblings.
Yes, but that's not specifically why I'd be showing this chart.
11th lord in the third house, Venus being the 11th lord in the third house.
That's it. It shows this pattern that this, quote, snapshot method that I've referred to of Kay and Rouse, 11th lord in the third. And she was indeed the eldest of 3 younger siblings, all by the same mother and father. And then later on, 2 half sisters and 2 half brothers. So all told, she had 3. That's 7. She had 7, younger siblings. Is that right? Yeah, 3 and 4. Yeah, but not all of them by the same mother and father. So here you see the snapshot method working. And then if I can find my note to myself here. She had the one born right after her, the sibling born right after her, was in Mercury Jupiter, and the one right after that was in Mercury Saturn. So if you just look at the Rashi, right? If you just look at the Rashi, you wouldn't necessarily see siblings in Mercury Jupiter. You might be able to predict sibling in Mercury Saturn. Why? Why could Mercury Saturn
rules the third house from the Lagna and from the moon.
Saturn rules the third house from the Lagna and the moon, and then one additional reason.
Saturn is third from from Mercury.
Good, Rita. So from Dasha Lagna, Saturn goes to the third. And Saturn as a sub-period, of course, is the ruler of the third from, as Luciana pointed out, both from the birth log and the moon. But Mercury is a major period. I know someone's trying to speak, but it's coming off rather garbled, and I'm sorry I can't hear it. So I'm not sure why, but just letting you know. But then, look at the degree of the Lagna, folks. Look at the degree of the Lagna. What should that alert you to when you're thinking about siblings?
The time. The Drakana would be different, not
yes,
much.
right. So the dividing line, a Drakana is 10 degrees of a sign, right? So three 10-degree segments. And the first 10 degrees is, and then so on. So what this indicates now, this time does not come from a written record. It comes from her and was quoted, in a biography. And it, as right on 4 o'clock, it's likely that it's not, it's approximate, it's not precise, right? So how much time would it take, backing up the birth time, to put the degree of the Lagna under 10 degrees? Approximately how much time?
About 3 minutes?
Maybe 3 minutes, maybe less, right? But that's probably correct. In which case, of course, what's going to be the Drakana Lagna if it is past 10 degrees? Anybody have an idea about that? What was going to be the Drakana Lagna if it is past 10? Aries, right? But what's going to be the Drakana Lagna if it's just under?
Sagittarius.
Right. So it would go from Aries, right, to Sagittarius. And my comment about that is that she had her first sibling in Mercury, Jupiter. Do you see the difference? Right? If you make it Sagittarius, Jupiter, first of all, Mercury and Jupiter are the period and subperiod of two planets together in the Drakana, right? So potentially predictable based on that alone. But I strongly suspect, no way of knowing for sure, I strongly suspect that the degree of Lagna is just under 10 degrees, giving the first Drakana, which would be Sagittarius, in which case, Jupiter also becomes the Lagna Lord. In any event, it's the period and subperiod of two planets in strength, Jupiter being in its own sign and Mercury being Vargotama, right, and getting its cancellation or getting its ability canceled. Okay, and also if we change the degree of the Lagna from 10, say, to 9, what then happens in the Navamsha? What happens to Navamsha?
Moves from 4th Navamsha to 3rd Navamsha.
Moves from 4th Navamsha to the 3rd Navamsha, in which case, instead of being a Cancer Navamsha Lagna, then it becomes a Gemini Navamsha Lagna. And remember that she married in her Venus major period, right? And actually it was Venus Rahu Jupiter, and this Gemini Navamsha Lagna would make Jupiter the Lord of the 7th house. As my Jyotish Guru would say, it appeals to me. There's no specific way to know for sure, but I suspect that the degree of the Lagna must come under 10 degrees. And then, this has nothing to do with the topic of siblings, but she had no children. Right? She had no children. What might be some combination here that would reflect that reality of her life?
Jupiter with Rahu in the 8th.
Aspected by Saturn.
Right. So Karaka here, even though it's in a very dignified condition, it's in an exaltation sign. You'll see that its dispositor is also in its exaltation sign, but then it goes to the 8th, it's with Rahu, and it's aspected by Saturn. The 5th house and the 5th lord itself here are not, problematic, but the fact of her life is she did not have children. Okay. Any questions about this example before we move on? Okay, so we're going to move on. Now, I gave an example in the article of how by using the chart of the mother the father and the older sibling, the older sibling, I was able to predict the birth of another child, right? Using those, charts, interlinked destiny. Because of course, if the mother and father were having a child, well, then the sibling was going to be getting a younger sibling. The older sibling would be getting a younger sibling. You should all recall that example. I had the opportunity to do something similar relatively early in my career as a Jyotishi. Some of you may know, because you've heard me mention it, that I'm blessed with a lot of sisters. I had 5 sisters. I was the only son. And this is a chart of my very youngest sister, Molly, who, as I mentioned, is actually 14 years younger than me. And using her chart, I made some of my earliest predictions about marriage and childbirth. And actually, they were pretty simple to make, as you'll see. She married and had 2 of her children in the Venus Mahadasha. So first of all, marriage, of course, could happen in the Venus period simply because Venus is Venus. The man that she married came into her life in the Jupiter sub-period, where they became a couple. You'll note that Jupiter is the 7th lord here. She actually married in Venus-Saturn. Of course, Saturn is the dispositor here of Venus. But actually, I made the prediction based on the fact of marriage, that is, and the timing of it, based on her Charadasha, where she was running Capricorn. What strikes you about that?
Got the DK.
Well, there's 3 things going on here, right? First of all, she's running the major period of a sign containing Venus, the natural Karaka, right? But now in this case, it also turns out to be the DK, and she's running the major period of Capricorn and the sub-period of Capricorn. This was in July of 1996. And so this is elegant simplicity, right? Didn't have to do a real complex analysis to see the potential for this period and sub-period to give this event. But of course, Venus is in the 5th house, right? So, it was relatively easy to see that children would soon follow. But then if you looked at, if I show you her Septamsha, why would children in Venus be, almost unavoidable?
Venus in the Lagna.
You see Venus in the Lagna here.
With an exalted Karaka.
With an exalted Karaka. Now, Luciana, because you mentioned this, there's some notion that the Karaka of a particular event, Jupiter for Venus, in the Lagna of D7, or say Venus in D9, et cetera, might not be a good thing. And again, I'm not saying that there's nothing to that principle, but I've seen repeated instances where it didn't seem to be a problem. Right? You can
Especially
look at
that's exalted, right?
Especially because it's exalted. But even if you look in the chart of Angelina Jolie, if you look in her D7, she has Venus and Jupiter. Venus not exalted, although it's in Aquarius. Venus and Jupiter. She gave twins. She gave birth to twins in her Venus-Jupiter period. So, I think, you have to not interpret things always dogmatically, invariably, but, make judgments based on, all factors. So I could see that she was going to give birth to children in Venus. She did, in fact, have 2 sons, my nephews. And by the way, does anybody want to guess, just based on the Septamsha here, in what period and sub-period in Vimshotri one of the sons came? In what period in Vimshotri one of the sons came?
Venus, Jupiter.
Of course, that would be a logical guess, but there would be another logical guess too, right?
Venus Rahu?
No.
Venus Mars.
Just based on the Septamsha here.
Venus,
So,
Jupiter.
well, we said Venus, Jupiter. I said it would have been a good guess, but no, Venus Ketu, folks. You know, if you read my small book or article, Intricate Patterns of Destiny, I highlight the way in which the period and subperiod of two planets in the Lagna divisional chart always hold a special potential for bringing the event relative to that divisional chart. And it was on the basis of Venus Rahu that I actually predicted the birth of her second son. And then, you know, but of course, I'm not doing that just based on the Parashari system. She had both of her sons in the Aquarius period in Charadasha, the Aquarius period in Charadasha. In what way could that have been predicted?
Jupiter falls fifth.
goes to the fifth house from.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were seeing it. If you use Aquarius as the Lagna, which is the technique in using Charadasha, the fifth from there has Karaka Jupiter. One came in the sub-period of Aries. Is there any way in which that could have been predicted? I didn't predict it, but sub-period of Aries.
Aspected by the PK.
Good, Rita. Good, Rita. Good, aspected by the PK. And then I did predict the second one because she was running the sub-period of Scorpio. Right? Sub-period of Scorpio, which of course has the PK itself. Right? But when I was predicting the birth of the younger one, I also had the chart of his older brother, right? I also had the chart of his older brother. So this is where, again, you can use this idea of interlinked destinies. And I'm now going to show you the chart of the older brother. Here's the chart. Mark the influences on the third house itself, of which there are many, because you have, you know, Jupiter and the moon there, and the influence of the Rahu-Ketu axis. And of course, then the Saturn is the third lord, and it's also with Mercury. So, you know, you've got quite a few grahas connecting to it. But which period would he have been born in? Look at the degrees of the moon. Which period would he have been born in? Which major period?
Was it
Mars.
Jupiter?
Mars. Dhanishta.
Oh, yes.
Mars major period, right?
Yeah.
Mars major period. And then followed by?
Rahu.
Rahu.
Rahu. Now think about Rahu's potential eligibility here for bringing this event. A couple reasons, just based on the Rashi, even before I show you D3.
Is dispositive with Karakamas?
Rahu's dispositor is Mars?
Now Sun was dispositive. It's dispositive.
Oh, I see. So its dispositor is Sun, and then it's conjunct Mars, who's the natural significator. Is that what your idea is? Hello? Okay. So, you know, can anybody have any other ideas about what would make?
So Rahu's aspecting the third house.
So the Rahu-Ketu axis is connected to the third house. And then does anybody see any other reason?
Yeah. So Rahu becomes goes to the Lagna in the D3.
Well, that's very good, Vijay. I haven't even shown you the D3 yet. I'm really going to take you to the head of the class for that one. But I was wanting to see if there's any other eligibility for Rahu, and I will give
Hey,
a
Mark.
clue. Yes?
Mark, is it Mercury, the Bhratrikarka, ninth from Rahu?
Well, but I mean, then you'd be kind of mixing systems, right? Because
Systems, yeah.
we're timing this in.
This is
so-
also the third lord, right?
Yes, but you know, folks, everybody, if you've been in this Jyotish Journey program for a while, you read an article called Udu's Clue. You read an article about Udu's Clue. What would be Udu's
In the
Clue?
nakshatra of Ketu is in the third
Yes.
house.
Rahu is in Magha, ruled by Ketu, who's in the third. But then Vijay was being very sophisticated here. He was mentally calculating the D3 Lagna and also the position of Rahu in D3. And he noted that Rahu is in the Lagna here. And the sibling came in Rahu, 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 Saturn. Rahu, 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 Saturn. And you'll see that Saturn, of course, is the third lord both in the birth chart and in the Drekana, right? So Rahu, Saturn. Now, let's see, in the Charadasha system, it was in Scorpio, Libra, Aries. Start with Scorpio, going back to the Rashi here. In what way could Scorpio become eligible for bringing this event?
Aspect by PK.
Right. So Scorpio gets the aspect of the BK making it eligible. Now, if you look at Libra as a subperiod, actually in the birth chart itself, there's reason in the Vamsha, but in the birth chart, or not in the D3, there's no real strong indication that this as a subperiod would give a sibling. But K and Rao highlighted that the sub period usually shows up very clearly in terms of the event. The sub period within Charadasha, the third level, very typically shows up very clearly the event, and the sub period with Aries, which of course contains both the third lord of the birth chart, Saturn, but also more significantly the BK, Mercury. So I saw, when I was looking at my sister's chart, her husband's chart, and then their oldest son's chart, then this period in June 2000 all looked like it was lining up to give the parents, a child, and the older brother a younger sibling. So this is again an example of predicting a childbirth by using the charts not just of the parents, but of a sibling who would be just older than the one potentially to be born. Questions about this before we then move on? Okay. So this is the chart of the younger sibling, my nephew. And we want to look at the transits. Now, everybody remember that the third lord of the third house of the older sibling is Aquarius, because it's Sagittarius Lagna. And the third lord, of course, is Saturn. So now see that at the time the younger sibling was born, Saturn and Jupiter were both in Taurus, very early degrees. What does that then mean as to where they've been in, say, a 9 month to a year prior?
In Aries.
Aries, and therefore covering the third lord of the older brother, right? And then remember, it's Sagittarius Lagna of the older brother, and you see that the Sun and Mars in Gemini. Mars actually, or Sun actually might have been, no, probably not. Within 45, 90 days, it'd be of some interest to see if they would have covered Aries. Regardless, being in Gemini, they would have been aspecting onto the Lagna of the older brother. And then, of course, see the position of the moon at the time that the younger brother was born. It's right on Saturn in Aries, the third lord of the older brother. Right? And you'll note that he has, this is the younger sibling, he has Rahu in the 11th. And, there was only 2 siblings, but he is the youngest. Right? He is the youngest. So now this is the chart of someone actually who may be attending this webinar. He's certainly someone who participates in a long-time participant in the Jyotish Journey Article Subscription Program. And he, after reading the article, it was kind of him, after reading the article, he wrote to me immediately and indicated that in his case, the timing was very clear of having a younger brother who was born in, what is born in Rahu, Saturn, I believe. Let me just check that. Yeah, he had a younger brother born in Rahu, Saturn. And of course, that could hardly be more clear since Rahu and Saturn are together in the third. And then see what happens in D3. So Rahu, Saturn are again in the third house of the Drakana. So this would have been a very clear timing of that event in his life. So now again, there's a specific reason that I always show certain examples, and it's a specific reason in this case. And so just study this chart or familiarize yourself with this chart. And why might I be showing you this chart?
Third and 11th lords together.
Right. Well, first of all, we see the pattern here of the 11th Lord with the third Lord, right? It's not the 11th Lord in the third house, or not the third house, the third Lord in the 11th house, but you've got an interesting situation where the third and 11th Lords are together, right? And under the influence of the Rahu Ketu axes, right? And then Jupiter here, does it have any source of strength? Anybody
For
notice?
Gautama.
It's for Gautama. And you know, there's a strong karaka of older siblings, and then there's also a strong karaka of younger siblings, but of course, you know, getting in the aspect of a strong Saturn as well. Right? And so looking at the degrees of the moon, in what period would she have been born? What major period? Moon is at 13 degrees of Gemini.
Rahu.
Rahu, and then approximately how many years balance remaining?
BTS.
A little more than that, all right, a little more than that, but that's a good estimate. And she is there was 6 children in all, right? So she has 5 siblings. She was the second born. She has an older sister, and then she has 4 younger siblings, 2 brothers and 2 sisters, if I have that right. Yeah. And they were all born in the Rahu major period. All born in the Rahu major period. So again, what strikes you about that? They were all born in the Rahu period. Why is this Rahu period so sibling giving?
Aspecting the third Lord.
Well, when we think about which results, you know, Rahu gives, we would
It
kind of
looks
get
like the third and the 11th lords.
both, right? Because so it's the planets most associated with Rahu, which is how we judge its results. It's first of all the moon and Jupiter, but particularly Jupiter, because it's not only in Jupiter's sign, but it's also aspecting. But then one more subtle point: whose nakshatra is Rahu in?
Mula
So,
Ketu.
K2.
ruled by Ketu, who's both the moon, the third lord, and Jupiter, the 11th lord. Okay? So obviously this, but now here's a subtle point, or not a subtle point, but here's another point that must be seen. In Charadasha, all but one came in her Taurus major period. In Charadasha, all but one came in her Taurus major period. By what principle of Jaimini could that have been predicted? By what principle of Jaimini could that have been predicted? Now, what you're probably doing is searching for some influence of the BK onto Taurus, which doesn't exist, or you're looking for the influence of the BK on the third house from there, which doesn't exist. So what might else be accountable in the Jaimini system for giving this result?
Father,
Who said this?
Julia.
Excellent, Julia. Excellent. Good for you. Good for you. So we know that, you know, we have to see padas because these can also indicate that an event could come at a particular time. So, of course, the third house is Cancer, ruled by the moon. If you count how many signs it's gone from its place in direct order, it comes to Gemini, counting 12 more, and you come to Taurus, right? So all of her younger siblings, she had 4 younger siblings, came in Taurus, but one came in, the last one came in Aries. That's a little more straightforward, is it not? Why would Aries giving a sibling be a little more straightforward?
Karaka of young siblings, Mars.
And what else?
became third.
Yeah.
In the third from there, BK goes, right? So you see this happening. Now, oh gosh, I meant to get my ephemeris and look at the transits of this, but I realized I didn't do this. So there's another reason why Rahu is giving this kind of result in the giving her siblings in D3. Can anyone see it here?
Yes, it's with the third lord and Karaka.
Right. So Mars here is Vargotama, number 1, and number 2, it's with the third lord Mars, so making it quite eligible to, you know, Luciana, would you have your ephemeris handy?
Sure.
Yes. Okay. If you wouldn't mind, if you have your ephemeris handy, if we could see the transits for August 31st, 1956. August 31st, 1956, as it relates to the chart of the sibling just oldest to her, which is this chart here.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, Saturn and Jupiter.
Jupiter was in Leo and Saturn was in Scorpio.
So Jupiter was in Leo, and what sort of degrees was Jupiter at in Leo?
It was at 11 degrees. Oh, not 11. It was at 17 degrees.
Right, and so it's likely that 9 months to a year before, or even from a retrograde position in Leo, Jupiter would have been covering the third house Cancer, right?
Yes.
And then Saturn?
Saturn, it was at 3 degrees, Scorpio. But then it was retrograde in July.
So it would have been aspecting from Libra as if the sign before onto the third house, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Mars, Mr. Mars?
Mars was retrograde in Aquarius.
So from Capricorn, aspecting onto Cancer. Sun?
Sun was in Leo.
So would have, within 45 days, probably been in Cancer, right? Third
Yes.
house. And then the moon, within, the moon here on that day.
The moon on that day was in Gemini.
On the third lord, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a bit blind testing, folks, because I hadn't looked at this myself, but you see how the transit parameters do apply here. Thank you, Luciana. Keep that handy. Keep that handy. Okay. So most of you have seen the chart of Angelina Jolie, famous movie star, celebrity of the US. Why would I be showing you this chart? Maybe.
Mercury, third lord in 11th.
Third lord in the 11th. And she's one of 2 siblings, the youngest. Right? 2 siblings. She has an older brother. And the older brother, they were, they had a famous father, both of them. The famous father was John Voight, the American actor. but their parents divorced at a very, very young age. But she is repeatedly quite close to her brother, and lifelong. She considers him she's described him as her best friend, which is kind of interesting since it's the third. Since it's the 11th house right here. She was the younger, right? So we wanted to look at the chart of the older brother, which is what you see here. Okay, is what you see here. Now, Angelina Jolie was born. Angelina was born on June 4th, 1975, and it was in his Parashari Sun-Mercury period. I'm showing you his chart again. Sun, Mercury, period and subperiod. By what principle that we talked about at the very beginning of the class could a younger sibling be born at that time be predicted?
Third from the Karaka.
Does everybody see that from Mars, Karaka, who's in the third house, by the way, is third from there, you have Mercury, Sun. So again, this event can show up in different ways, but consistent in my experience with the parameters that were laid out. If you see his Drakana, there's some support also for birth of a sibling in what did I say, Sun Mercury or Mercury Sun? Sun Mercury, right? So what's the support here, Sun Mercury?
Sankhya Yoga.
Well, there is a Sankhya Yoga between them because they're 5-9 from each other. So whoever said that, congratulations. But I was also looking at something else.
Sun aspecting
Sun
the third
aspecting
house.
Mercury is that Lord.
So you see it. The Sun is aspecting the third house, and of course, Mercury is the third lord. And see the sambandha between them.
Yeah.
Mercury is disposited by the Sun. Okay? So he gets a younger sibling. Now, I know you can look at the you look at the positions of certain planets in Jolie's chart. Remember, so you have Saturn in Gemini, and you have Jupiter in Pisces, Mars and Moon in Pisces, Sun in Taurus. So looking at the chart of the older brother, remembering that the third house is Aquarius and the third lord is Saturn. So Jolie's Saturn is in Gemini, right? And from a retrograde position there within that certain period would have been aspecting as if from Taurus, where the third lord of the older brother is. Jupiter is in Pisces, right? And within that specified time frame would have been influencing Aquarius, her third house, right? And then Jolie's Mars is in Pisces, and it would have also, within that time frame, been influencing Aquarius, as well as the moon within a 72-hour period. Jolie's Sun is actually in Taurus, which of course is therefore covering the third lord of her older brother's chart. So, what I have tried to show you here in a variety of different ways, just additional examples of what I was giving in the article for both timing the birth of siblings and looking at these snapshot methods. Is there any questions about anything we've covered thus far? I would think it's fairly straightforward. Now, I'm presuming that those of you with siblings, particularly younger siblings and so on, look to see if these parameters worked, as it were. So I'm wondering if there's anybody in the audience that, number one, has either the third lord in the 11th or the 11th lord in the third, who would be willing to comment whether the snapshot, or Rahu in the third or Rahu in the 11th, whether or not that snapshot method applied to their chart or not. Anybody among us where that applied?
Yes, it applied to my brother, my elder brother.
So he's the eldest, right?
Yeah, he's the eldest.
Among how many siblings, Vijay?
In fact, 3. My brother, elder brother, me, and my younger sister.
I see. And what's the lagna?
Gemini.
And so what is the pattern in his case?
Yeah. So he has the third Lord Sun in Aries.
I see. It goes to the 11th.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. And did you happen to look at the timing when the next sibling after him was born?
Yes, he did.
And what did you find?
So he was running the Jupiter Dasa.
I see.
Jupiter was in Scorpio.
Mm-hmm.
And I still don't remember the.
Yeah, and that's all. And that's all right. You know, I have your. Well, that I don't have his chart. I have your chart. You know, that's not going to help us, is it? Anyone else care to comment?
Mark, my daughter has Saturn and Rahu in the 11th. She's the oldest.
Okay. Oldest among how many, Barminder?
4.
4. Okay. So that's the idea of Rahu, right? And what's
two malefics in the 11th.
2 malefics in the 11th. And what's the lagna there?
Karka Lagna.
Karka Lagna. So this is going to be in Taurus then?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So wouldn't those 2 malefics in the 11th wouldn't allow anyone else being born before her, huh?
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
And incidentally, there was a miscarriage before that. So, you know, that kind of again goes to indicates miscarriages. If you have 11th, you know, there's nobody else.
Sure. Very good. I mean, thank you for sharing. Not very good, but I appreciate you sharing the example. Anyone else? Anyone else among us who care to comment?
Just one other thing, Mark, real quick. She had 3 siblings born in the Mercury Mahadasha, which is in the 9th.
So aspecting the 3rd.
Yeah, it's a Vargotama Mercury in the 9th.
And did you examine the position of Mercury in the Drekana?
No, I didn't, but I can look it up. I mean,
that's all right. That's okay. That's okay. In the Drekana, obviously the older sibling, right? And see how that's giving younger siblings.
Right.
That's what you'd want to take a look at.
Right.
Okay. Anyone else want to offer anything here?
Yeah, my elder brother, eldest, has the 3rd Lord Venus in 11th with Rahu. He's the eldest.
Among how many siblings, Julia?
Yeah, I've got 2 eldest. I'm the youngest. And I've got Rahu in 3rd with the 3rd Lord Jupiter.
I see. Okay. So it seemed to be working in this case.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. Very good. Anyone else? You know, when Kane Rao, and you know, I just recently got back from a program at an ashram in Pennsylvania with some of the students who are actually here with me now. And we were doing a program on predicting major life events. And the first event I started with was this event of the birth of younger siblings. And, you know, where I was sharing basically, you know, what I was sharing here. And, you know, you can't expect it to work again 100% of the time, but you'll see that these snapshot methods that Kane Rao evolved, and I think they were purely observational on his part is how they came about. I don't think he came across it in any book or learned that from any teacher. It was just an original research of his. It really does tend to come out quite frequently, but don't expect it to. Invariably, I showed the one example of Carmen Diaz, the American actress, who had the 11th Lord Mars in the 3rd house, but was a middle child. She has an older sister and a younger brother. All right, unless there's anyone else to share, basically, you know, this is what I had to share today, folks. And, you know, thanks for all the wonderful comments and participation. We will, as usual, say our Sanskrit prayer. Om Masato Ma Sadgamaya, Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityor Ma Anukam Gamaya, Sarvesham Swasti Bhavatu, Sarvesham Shanti Bhavatu, Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu, Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone. Namaste until we all meet again. Bye for now.